Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a December edition of not Real Estate Realities. That's the podcast of Coffee and Real Estate. I have my cup this morning. I hope all of you do as well. It's just our monthly opportunity to get together and talk about real estate. I am beardless this month. For those of you who are new, that means nothing to you. For those of you who've been with me for a while, this might be the first time in a long time you've seen me without a beard. And having freshly shaved for the first time in over a year this morning, I'm feeling it this morning on my face. So there's lots of interesting things we can talk about. There's not a whole lot of shocking info relating to the monthly numbers, but there's a lot of interesting like national stuff. Uh, a lot of trend stuff, and again, I know I've said this before. So much of this feels the same as it did before the last downturn. And I realize how loaded that comment is. And I'd love to hear back from you all. We're obviously doing this live on Facebook. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions, any comments you'd like to make, and I'm happy to run with it if we get a question that requires a little bit of research. I'm happy to jump up onto the web here and do some research live while we chat about it. Because that's what we're about, right? We're about trying to answer questions and get a better perspective. Now, my goal here with our monthly meeting is for buyers, sellers, and investors to just get information that helps them understand what is going on with the market right now and where things are going. I am keeping an eye on several different markets. For those of you who've been listening to me for a while through my podcast and attending these, you know that I'm kind of keeping my eye on stuff like where are great places to potentially invest right now? Does it make sense to invest in California at all? I continue to see trends we've talked about before as it relates to people leaving the state. Texas just, I think it was the governor. We've got that article to cover today if we want to have a chat about that. Talking about a tidal wave of companies and people moving to Texas. And Texas is just one of several destinations that I see folks who talk to me about selling their home, where they're going to go. Idaho is up there on the list. What's hot? Boise, Idaho, Arizona, a variety of different places I've never heard of actually in Arizona that I'm sure are just suburbs of Phoenix. Texas. What was the other one? There was an East Coast state. No, was it North Dakota? Anyway, so the point is, it's not just Texas. A lot of states are seeing this trend because we're seeing such an exodus from California. And I'm also, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but when I have face-to-face conversations or even internet conversations with people about this trend, I get some weird responses that don't make a lot of sense to me. And we can talk about that as well if you like. Conversations with people about this trend. Look at that. It is actually going. So that is a wonderful thing. I'm just making sure I've got comments up here so that I can see what everyone is or isn't saying. Let me make sure it's working. And it is. I'm seeing stuff. Excellent. So I've got it there. I've got it here. I feel like I'm not going to miss it. So, and if you do ask a question and it takes me a little while to realize you've asked a question, don't be upset. I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking at data, and the places where I can see comments are in two different places, and they're both. One of them is open, but one of them's blocked by other things that you can't see are blocking me. All right. So I guess our place to start, we can jump in as we have in past months with a rundown on the numbers. I don't think there's any really huge revelations in the data this particular month. I think we're tending to see more of the same. I'm totally happy to take a look at that and see where we're going with numbers. And the number that we're going to see for percent over or under asking price for San Jose and Santa Clara County, totally wrong. It is a perfect example of things that I've talked about before whenever you're looking at the data and let your brain work, right? I was having a conversation. I had an agent reach out to me and go, Robert, have you seen the San Jose Santa Clara County numbers for price over asking price? It's insane. People are getting 163% of their asking price. So, and in San Jose, 220%. Of course, that's wrong. Just everybody, just keep your brain turned on. If something sounds that out, you need to go look at the numbers. And this one was super easy to figure out, and I will explain to you why in a minute. And here's what's nuts. This was an agent who a relatively new agent. I've done some side mentoring with this person, and they didn't come to me first when they called me, unfortunately, after they used this data in a listing presentation, I guess. And so they were saying, hey man, look at the dramatic jump we're seeing and what people are getting versus asking price. You really need to jump on board now. And I think it's a perfect example of how people don't think critically enough a lot of times about the data that they see. But man, do people desperately want to believe certain things. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, well, let's go ahead and we'll save the crazy numbers for the end. But first, as usual, we'll go with total active listings. And this is the total number of active listings, the total inventory, the homes that were for sale in the month of November compared to the same time last year. And the reason why we're looking at it like that is because you want to correct for seasonal influences. And again, I say this every time before we do this. This is true of all of these numbers. You want to see how far we've moved since last year. And unfortunately, I don't think I updated the numbers for overtime tracking relating to, I need to add a column here. And we could do that live if we really feel the need to. But frankly, the numbers haven't changed enough. Everything has sort of remained static. No big changes from month to month on this one, except for that number that is incorrect. So, and I'm personally going to correct that. But the system makes it really hard to make that correction I have to pull the numbers out of the MLS, and then I have to do things to the numbers. It's stupid. Anyway, all right. So, and this is an important number because it's what you have to see in that month if you're shopping. So if you're an investor or you're a buyer, it's important because these are the homes that you had to choose from in November. How many were there? It's important for you as a seller because you want to get an idea of what is the competition that I'm facing in terms of other sellers. There's always a perspective on all of these numbers that's important to everybody in the mix. Of course, sellers don't need to worry about potential competition overall. They need to worry about potential comparative competition, right? If you have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath home, well, you're not attracting the person who's the 3-bedroom, 2-bath home person, right? So you need to find out what is my competition for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath home in my area that makes sense, right? So there's definitely some fine tuning. This is 10,000 foot view stuff. And when you do places like Santa Clara County, it's even higher, right? So for Morgan Hill, it's a 10,000 foot view. For San Jose, just because it's a gigantic city, it's a 20,000 foot view. And for Santa Clara County, it's a 100,000 foot view because there's hundreds of different submarkets in all of those areas. All right. And it's also just interesting to note the changes, right? So overall, we had the total number of active listings in Santa Clara County up from last year 11%, up 7% in San Jose, and up 56%, or excuse me, not up, sorry, opposite of that, turn it around, 180 degrees, down 11% from last year, down 7% in San Jose, down 56% in Morgan Hill. Now, this is an interesting trend in Morgan Hill where we are in terms of the numbers that encourage sellers, that indicate sellers are more in the driver's seat. Morgan Hill continues, and this is the trend we've seen over the last few months we've been doing this, to sort of be that city where the seller side of this market is just getting fed way more than the buyer side. And this is one number that does that. When you have dramatically few, I mean, look at that number. There were 47 homes total for sale in November. And that includes residential, townhome, and condominiums. I do all of the primary residential categories. That's insane. Less than half from the same time last year. It's crazy. Okay. But an interesting thing for you to note if you're a seller. If you're a seller, this is very encouraging for you. If you're a buyer and you really want to live in Morgan Hill, or an investor, I think the takeaway from that one is if you're a buyer, you need to start thinking like an investor. You need to start look depending on what your the thing is. If money isn't a huge concern for you, if you feel like you're super qualified, you've got all the money you want, and you really only want to buy a walk-in home, you don't want to take on a lot of stress, you don't want to buy a home that you have to do a lot of things to. Well, okay, then maybe you have to bite the bullet and you have to pay what that average price is when we come up to that. If not, though, you have to start putting on your thinking cap and start thinking like an investor in terms of where can I get the biggest bang for the buck? And we are now at a point where that includes buying land and building on it. If you go and do the math, even an expensive chunk of land, you could go out and buy it, build your home on it, landscape it, and depending on the circumstances, right, you always have to do your due diligence, you would end up paying far less than you would for even a existing home, a pre-existing home, and you'd end up with a home that you helped design. We've talked about this before. I actually did yeah, you know what? I won't even mention it. It's been 2 years ago, so I doubt anyone is even aware that I did a sort of an online thing for building your own home. But so yeah, so that's number one. That's the total active listings. Now the new listings, these are the homes that were added to the market in the month. So you listed your home this month. 34 last year in Morgan Hill, 59 this year. So a 73.5% increase in new listings, which is interesting. We saw similar numbers. We didn't see quite as many, I think, last month. We can actually check. What did we see in October? In October, I know I had a labeling problem here. In October, it was 12.9%, which is interesting compared to last year. Now, same number of listings, if you'll note here, or slightly fewer, but the drop off was far less. And this supports the theory that I had last time we talked, and that is that we were not going to see a normal season this winter. This is November. This is normally the first month where we start to see a big drop off. Now, if you see in October, the new listings last year at the same time were 70, right? So normally people don't list their homes in November. It's normally, right? This year, totally not the case. Now, fewer than last year. So we did see a drop, but we saw a much slighter drop than we did last year, which gives us that big percentage difference. So it's not that we're seeing an increase in the number of homes that would be listing per se. It's just comparatively speaking, right? So there are a lot more sellers that are thinking to themselves, wow, I really want to get into this market now, at a time when in the past, no sellers were thinking that. You usually saw a very big drop. So what does that spell for buyer, seller? And let's cover the rest of the areas. 73.5% increase in Morgan Hill, a 53.4% increase in San Jose, and a 65.6% increase in the county at large. And I think this is the phenomenon that I've already referred to. We are in a position where a lot of people are seeing this as an opportunity to take their profit out of their house. They're not seeing as much competition in the marketplace. They're feeling more comfortable. I am seeing far fewer people concerned about COVID. And I realize that's a comment that probably needs a lot more explanation. But when I'm talking to buyers and sellers, and this has changed just since last month, I'm getting fewer people that are super concerned about it. Now, folks that are that are in the higher risk groups, the folks that are a little older, absolutely still concerned. My parents are in that position where they're very concerned about COVID and they don't even want to come out of the house. So that's a thing. But I'm finding folks, at least here in Morgan Hill in general, that call me who are even in the higher risk groups. They're willing to say, yeah, you know what, we'll list the price, we'll list the home, and we'll just make sure that you are helping us observe COVID safe strategies that keep us safe. So I'm seeing a little bit more, let's get on with it kind of an attitude, I guess, in the face of the COVID restrictions, which probably is also feeding this. But there's an awful lot of profit takers out there. There's an awful lot of people who are ready to get out. And by get out, I mean leave the state. So, and we're going to talk more about that with some interesting articles that I have running here for you. Homes sold. This is the total number of homes sold in the month. And you can see that compared to last year, Santa Clara County has seen about a 29.8, almost a 30% increase in the total number of homes sold. 24% increase in San Jose, and a 48.9, so almost a 49% increase in Morgan Hill. Now, this is kind of on par with the homes sold. We saw 58% increase in the number of homes sold last month, and we're seeing a 48% increase. That all makes sense to me. This all fits in with a measured decline that you tend to see when you hit the month of November in numbers like this, but not nearly the decline we would expect. Which why when you're looking at it, just taking the highlight number, it can seem a little confusing. But when you look at it compared to the same time last year, you realize, oh, okay, well, we're seeing a weirdness in that we're just not seeing the dramatic drop we normally see in the month of November. Okay, average list price, and these are some crazy numbers. Santa Clara County, 1.3 million last year, 1.5 million this year for a 14% average home price increase. List price, remember. So when we're thinking list price, you need to calibrate yourself to the idea that this represents seller expectations, right? It's rare to see an agent fight for a lower price. The agents want the listing primarily, right? So if an agent comes in with numbers that show you should list your home for $1.4 million and the seller wants to list it for 1.5, there might be some hemming and hawing, but that agent's not going to lose the listing over that. They're going to list it at 1.5. And depending on the scenario, that could either be okay or very bad, right? If you list your home at the wrong price, it could stay on the market forever, and your holding costs, because it costs you money, right, to not sell your home. So that's always a concern. But remember, this is setting the expectations. So expectations are super high among folks, and here's the thing. Right now, there is such a frenzy out there that they're not really not calibrated to reality. Homes are just selling. They're blowing out the doors. Homes that I have listed over the last year, for instance, that are historically really hard to sell, have been not hard to sell. Well, as long as you're doing the right marketing, right? There's even in the face. I always go back to my Finley Ridge properties that I've done over the last couple of years, just because I'm really proud of the results I got on particularly on the most recent one, because even now there are properties that just don't get sold. There was a really good example, literally, of a property that was across the street in Caddy Corner from one I sold that just A, never got sold, and B, ended up being a rental because they couldn't get it sold. And when I looked at how that, well, I believe I could have gotten the results that the seller desired on that one. So anyway, we're not here to pump up Robert. But anyway, so even the super challenging markets, if you're getting to the right people, you should be able to get really good results. All right, so now let's talk about average sales price. Now, to calibrate, again, my buyers, sellers, and investors, this should tell you how competitive is it out there. If I want to go in and buy a home, am I going to have to bite the bullet and pay more than asking price? And the answer is sometimes. And it comes down to that argument. Here's the general rule. In a market like this, if you are looking for a move-in ready home that's freshly painted, everything's updated, everything is awesome, it's just ready for you to live in, yeah, you're going to pay more than asking price for that property. What you need as a buyer or investor in these scenarios is to find those homes that have deficiencies that scare off other buyers. You'd be amazed at the things that scare off buyers. Now, granted, the things that scare off buyers are a lot less these days. Buyers are willing to put up with an awful lot. I went and looked at a house a couple of weeks ago that normally would be harder to sell. Lots of deferred maintenance. Clearly, the person living there never did anything. They were borderline hoarders. So It was difficult to even get through the house because there was so much stuff. And that thing sold for over asking price, and it sold quickly. Um, that wasn't here in Morgan Hill though. That was in San Jose, but it ended up going for over asking price. Um, and not a newer home, right? So this was a '70s home. So and no updates. You would have to if you wanted to kind of bring it up to date and freshen it up, you'd need to remodel an awful lot. It had one of those bathrooms with a lot of pink tile in it. Shag carpeting looked like it came from the '70s. So anyway, it was horrible and ended up selling for over asking price. All right, but you can still find them. They are out there, and as I mentioned last month, there are still properties out there that reduce their price over the course of trying to get it sold. Those are still happening. If that's still happening, you as a buyer or investor can still find properties that might make sense for you. We can talk about if politically they make sense, right? We can have that conversation. We've got some interesting articles to cover that. But if this is where you want to invest, there are definitely still opportunities. And there's even better opportunities outside of the footprint of Silicon Valley. If you want to go to the bedroom communities to the south or to the east or to the north or northeast, there's still plenty of opportunities there that I think are, at least if we look at the numbers, indicate a good not only rental income but also appreciation. So, all right. And let's go ahead so I don't know if we went over all of them. So the average sales price in Santa Clara County, 1.3 million. Last year, 1.5 million this year for a 15% increase, 15.5% increase. San Jose, just a little over 1 million average last year. Now it's 1,189,000 for an 18.7% increase year to year. Morgan Hill last year, 939,773,000, and now at 1,092,000 for a 16.3% increase. Next, let's look at percent over under asking price. And this is really an interesting one. This is one I like to cover because it really tells you how calibrated folks were, right? If you listed your home for $100,000 and it sold for less than that, you weren't really calibrated to what the market would bear, depending on how fast you're trying to get the home sold. And the numbers for Santa Clara County and San Jose are completely, totally, 100% wrong. And we're going to talk about why they're wrong and how important it is to really think about these numbers. This is the thinking cap portion of this month's show. Oh. Okay. The only accurate number in here is Morgan Hill. The only accurate number in here is Morgan Hill. So Morgan Hill last year was at 95.6% of asking price, meaning you got about 4.4% below your asking price last year, which is still kind of nuts. Having been doing business during that time of the year last year, it stuns me that there were homes going that much below asking. This year, for the month of November, 101.1% for a 5.8% overall increase on the percentage. Now let's talk about San Jose. San Jose last year, 97.6, 220% in November of 2020. Anybody who sees that number and doesn't immediately think that is wrong doesn't know how numbers work. So for those of you out there who are listening, who may potentially list your home for sale, and when it's going to happen, because I've had at least one agent, as I mentioned, approach me and say, yeah, I used this in my listing appointment to try to get that listing. I don't recall if he got it or not. I think the person said they wanted to interview more agents before they made their decision, but totally not 220% over asking. Same with Santa Clara County. So what's the problem? The problem is one property in San Jose, which is also in Santa Clara County, was listed incorrectly by an agent. I wonder do I still have that up? I may not have it up on a browser that you can see. It looks like I closed the browser that I had it on. Do I still have it? No, I don't have it up. So, what happened? There was a single property. So to figure this out was not that hard. I went and I did a search for all properties that sold in the month of November in all of San Jose. So, because clearly, just logically filtering it down, right? If I was seeing that happening in if I was seeing it happening in both San Jose and Santa Clara County, clearly it was a home that was listed in San Jose. So I limited my search to San Jose for all homes that sold. I have a column that tells me what the list price to sales price ratio is, and I just sorted it. And sure enough, there it was, a single one property that was originally listed by the agent who listed the property for $1,516 when they intended to list it for $1.516 million. And there you go. That is it. One single, one poorly entered listing, not paying attention to detail, as with someone who lists homes and knows what you're entering and knows what the process is to enter a home, how you enter that number and not realize it, kind of mind blowing. But that is as it is. That single misentry is what caused it. So what's the real number? Yeah, it's right about what it was the last time we looked. I believe about 102%. I haven't sussed out the exact correct number, but it's about 102%. At least it appears to be. It could be a little less than that, to be honest. I need to pull out the numbers. I need to do some math. It wasn't letting me generate a report just on the sold properties that I selected after I deleted the bad property. So anyway, and you know what? When I looked at that property, it ended up actually not selling for over asking price. It ended up selling for below asking price. So it's kind of ironic that it ended up that way. Okay, so there we've got our overall lay of the land numbers for the month of November. Not a lot of huge surprises there. The only tidbit I think you take away from this that you should carry with you is what I said last month has turned out to be true. We are seeing a much more robust November and heading into winter, a much more robust marketplace than you would normally see in winter. So I don't think we're going to see, at least relative to what's already going on, that humongous drop we normally see in November, where we really see a giant drop in inventory. We just didn't see it. We've seen actually a pretty amazing increase in the number of listings, which really just reflects, because last month's new listings in Morgan Hill, for instance, we had 70 something. So we have 20 fewer this month than last month on a month-to-month basis, which totally makes sense because of seasonal influences. But at the same time last year, we had half that, right? Okay. So now let's take a minute to look at some interesting news items. We'll go ahead and put up the web bit here. This is the first one I wanted to cover. I've got 7 different articles that I sort of keyed off of as interesting to take a look at. If you have any questions about these on the way, I'm happy to discuss them with you. But as a buyer, seller, investor, you need to, as a seller, if you're someone who's in the area that I serve, I do not think if I had to put up a what to do now one-liner, should sellers sell? Yes, I would say that taking your profit now would be a smart move, to the point that I believe that given the rest of the news we're going to cover here, it wouldn't surprise me. And again, there's all kinds of different things that might get done to try to slow it down, prevent it, forestall it. And I realize this is counter to what a lot of the headlines are saying, but too much of this feels like what we were in before and seems to be setting the stage for a downturn in the market. So if someone were to say to me, Robert, I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to rent a house after I sell it, and I'm going to stay around and I'm going to wait for the market to go down and then I'm going to buy something, would I say that is a good idea or a bad idea? I would ask where they want to go after, so we could do a little bit more work on how things are going on in that market and how affected it might be. But given how things are, I'd say that falls into the realm of kind of reasonable. I don't see a huge problem there. Is it a roll of the dice? Absolutely. Things could get done on a national level, or different programs could be put into effect. But we are setting the stage with the exact same kind of stuff. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. We're halfway through the show, so we've got a good 30 minutes to go through this. And I'm happy to go longer if anyone comes along who wants to chat about this. It's a subject that I think deserves some attention. The first article here is from National Real Estate Investor. More U.S. homeowners seek to delay mortgage payments. Now, let's think about what that means for a second. When you're delaying your mortgage payment, you are increasing your indebtedness, the overall amount of money that you owe. This is a bad thing. At some point, you owe so much, you're really buried, and recovering from that is difficult. So the tendency that I'm seeing right now is not a prolonged process of supporting something like this. It seems like at some point there will be an ending, which would mean you'd have to come up with the money. Now, in this article, in the first week of December, the proportion of mortgage borrowers that sought forbearance rose to its highest level since August. Now, remember, the whole COVID thing started a few months before August. So the folks in August would have been the folks who are the first reactors to the COVID thing, right? The folks who lost their jobs first and who were living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe not even paycheck to paycheck, maybe just had a couple of months saved up. Bloomberg, a growing percentage of U.S. homeowners are looking to delay making mortgage payments, the latest sign that the economic recovery is hitting a snag. In the first week of December, the proportion of mortgage borrowers that started seeking forbearance relief rose to its highest level since August. And that's according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. Now, and the number of people who can be having a problem can be relatively low, and still cause a much larger problem. Let's see. The percentage of homeowners that have started seeking forbearance is still relatively low, but the rising proportion comes even as the economy has shown signs of recovery, underscoring how uneven the turnaround is. U.S. household net worth reached a fresh record of 123.5 trillion in the third quarter, while almost 4 million workers have been unemployed for more than 27 weeks. Delinquencies are up too. So those are two things you really don't want to see. You're seeing more people wanting to delay their mortgage payment, and you see more people who are actually in their delinquencies. And I would love to see these numbers, but I honestly believe that the way this is being handled is underreporting the number of folks who are delinquent. Because I don't believe that we see the numbers on homes that are really delinquent until obviously the bank files paperwork, right? It's one of these things where, given what we went through last time, I think it's entirely reasonable to believe that there is a shadow inventory of delinquent properties, not foreclosed yet, but delinquent. And I think that because of some of the regulatory things or the government things that have been done to really try to let people survive this, that a lot of these are sort of hanging out on the sidelines and not really being counted in a public way, in a way that we would hear about it. Even in the forbearance program, delinquencies have been rising in part because some borrowers may not know they're eligible for relief. At the end of the third quarter, about 7.7% of loans were delinquent. Okay, that's a big number. 7.7% of loans delinquent, that's not a small number. That is a very big number. According to the Mortgage Bankers Association, about twice the percentage at the end of 2019. Delinquencies are still below their financial risk peak of around 10%. And that's what I was going to say. Financial crisis peak. That's the peak. At what point in the financial crisis, when we had 7.7% delinquent, what was going on in the market? 10% is the peak. We're on our way to the peak. We are less than 3%. We're 2.3% away from the peak in terms of the number of people delinquent. And if my belief is even vaguely close to being true, that we're not even hearing about the potential backlog of delinquencies, that number could jump up by 2, 3, 4% really fast, really easy. And here's the other thing: the program is coming to is when banks aren't covered, when banks aren't seeing their money get covered, this is going to become more of a thing. They may be holding back on a lot of this stuff because there's government programs there to back them up and to backstop them, and they're also interested in consumer confidence in the banking industry. But at some point, the money has got to be there, and if the program ends, the banks are going to simply try to recover what they can recover. As the program comes to an end, buyers of mortgage bonds that include loans. Now, this is where things get nuts, right? Remember, one of the contributing, and this is why this is deja vu all over again. One of the contributing factors, one of the huge contributing factors last time was the securitization of high risk mortgages, right? The subprime lending debacle wasn't just about subprime lending. It was about investment instruments that were based on it, right? Thanks to FHA, Fannie and Freddie. They actually helped create these bundled up mortgages. And we're seeing the same thing now. They're not using the same terms. They're not calling them subprime, but that's what's happening. Things that would have been considered subprime mortgages back in the day, back before the downturn, are considered not subprime because of the way we've changed the way lending works and because of the way we look at a debt portfolio where things that shouldn't count towards positive credit do, like paying your power bill and your phone bill and all those kinds of wonderful things. And then not counting judgments against you relating to things like medical treatment. Don't even put a tag on how much money you owe. Just say, here is money I owe, a huge chunk of money that requires payments. And despite the fact other things are counted, the medical stuff isn't counted. And say what you want about the political side of that. Oh, well, it's a shame that people, it's debt. It's just debt. So it should absolutely be something that has an influence on your credit rating. If you're carrying $1 million in debt, whether it's medical or not, that should be counted in your credit portfolio, right? Of whether or not you're a prime or subprime borrower. And a lot of that's been short-circuited. Okay, and we're coming close to where this thing's going to end, and that's a big concern. Servicers likely to buy back about $93 billion of mortgages this year, up from $41 billion in 2019. And remember, these have been securitized. These loans have been bundled. So again, it stretches beyond just housing, just banks, and gets into the stock market. And that's one of the things that caused so much trouble last time, because suddenly all these folks, a lot of folks that are in retirement, 401ks, all these things were negatively affected because they were heavily invested in this real estate stuff. And these orgs that got burned last time are still invested in real estate now, right? How can they resist given the returns that we're seeing, these numbers? And it's the same mindset. They're thinking about just the number that comes back, just like we were totally wrong or totally misled by a number that said 200+% increase in or over asking price, right? When you look a little closer and see what a lot of this is built on, it's really scary. All right, so the next, renters return to Manhattan. See, this is another one of those, a 30% gain in new leases. Yes, a 30% gain in leases, just people renting after a gigantic decrease. Now that's the headline. And oh, great, if we all just walked away from that and said, all right, wonderful, the real estate market's totally recovering, we don't need to pay attention to anything. They'd be totally wrong. Now, at least there are some of the key points here are mentioned in this article, which frequently does not happen when looking at things from some of these news outlets. But they absolutely focused on the only piece of good news. The number of new apartment leases signed in Manhattan in November jumped 30% compared with a year ago, according to a report from Miller, Samuel, and Douglas Elliman, whoever those people are. Great. Fantastic. Not sure who those people are. And that concerns me. It's not some independent organization that tracks rentals. I don't know who those two guys are. Maybe they're property owners in New York. I don't know. So I'm dubious of the 30% increase just from that, right? In terms of thinking critically. The median rent price is now $2,743, with most landlords offering more than 2 months rent free. Okay, so they're offering 2 months rent free. And the one piece of data that's not in that line that should be is, what was the median rent price a year ago? Do we want to bet it was a hell of a lot more than $2,743 a month? Because it probably was. Next, a real estate recovery in Manhattan will likely take years given the huge supply of empty apartments and condos and co-ops for sale, brokers say. The vacancy rate is at a record 6%. Anything over 5% is a bad thing, right? That's not the worst. It could be a lot worse than that. So that 6% isn't like apocalyptic. But maybe even higher due to unlisted apartments. And I think that's the part. I would be willing to bet that the real number there is a lot more than 6%. I'm not a big New York market guy. I don't know New York very well. But it is one of those markets where I'll monitor sort of the highlight numbers just to sort of get a feel nationally, right? Since it's such a huge metropolitan area, it wouldn't make sense not to, right? It's along the same lines of why I monitor some places in Florida, and I monitor Phoenix, and I monitor Las Vegas. Las Vegas is an interesting one because it's sort of a weird outlier. It's an interesting one because it relies so much on tourism. And I think tourism is an interesting bellwether on what's coming when tourism starts to take a huge drop. Okay, so that's what they give us in the bullet points. And if I'm correct, um, here we go. Here's what it was. The median net effective rent or rental prices, including concessions, fell 22% in November. That tied with October for the biggest record drop on record. So, despite how many leases you're signing or whatever else is happening, from month to month, October to November, you still saw a 22% drop compared to the same time last year in terms of what the rents were. Almost a quarter drop on average. And I'm betting it's a lot more than that in some areas. The median rent was $2,743. Real estate recovery in Manhattan will likely take years, yada, yada. So this is the first time I've ever considered the possibility of suggesting people invest in New York real estate. I think a lot of things need to happen in New York in order to feed a recovery. New York is suffering from the same. This is an example of the other coast experiencing what California is experiencing, where people want to move out. People do not want to live there. San Francisco is an excellent example, and I'm more tuned in with San Francisco because I talk to people who live there. I talk to people who work there. I go there from time to time. I now want to go there as little as possible. It is and a lot can be said for Los Angeles being in the same boat. There's just chaos in terms of homelessness is a thing, and there's a difference between being a homeless person and being an aggressive street dweller, right? You've got folks, a smaller percentage of the total, right? A very small percentage of homeless people are people who are homeless who are going to stay homeless. There's some people who are just on tough times, and they're gonna work that stuff out. There are support mechanisms they're going to take advantage of. Then there are folks who live in homelessness. They're going to stay there a long time. They don't take advantage of the things to get them out of homelessness for a variety of reasons, whether that's drug addiction or mental illness or whatever else. So there's it's a very complex problem that needs solutions that are aimed at the different, and for the folks, the extreme minority of homeless people who are just normal folks on bad times, that number is much smaller of the population than you'd think. At least that's been my personal experience. And yes, I have actually worked in the homeless community before. Back in the 90s, when I was a emergency medical technician and I did night shifts, I drove an ambulance around and worked an awful lot with the homeless community. Younger than that, I actually used to work at the First Street Armory in San Jose. I used to help feed the homeless in the wintertime and get them set up with beds. So I've absolutely had exposure. No recent experience. I haven't been really tied in with the homeless community lately. I know folks who are, and there's there's honest conversations we need to have about that, but it's all of the negative ends of that are being completely ignored um, by local governments, and it's getting out of hand. I mean, when you have to avoid regularly human waste on the streets, that's A, that's something the city should be dealing with, and B, it's totally unacceptable, and it's causing a huge exodus, and people just are done. People are finished. They don't want to be involved anymore. Okay, let's see. So that's an interesting one. Next one, 10 markets to lead. Now, this is from the Association of Realtors. Again, when you're putting on that thinking cap, you have to think, this is data that's coming to me from somebody who has a vested interest in what happens in real estate. The National Association of Realtors is going to tend to put the best spin on the real estate market that they possibly can. Why? They want to encourage people to become realtors. Now, the National Association of Realtors does not make money based on what your home sells for, but they do make money based on how many real estate agents are paying dues, like me. And they hit us for a huge pile of money every year, and they want more and more people to pay that pile of money. So they're going to put a spin on it that makes it appear to be attractive for buyers and sellers to buy and sell, because that means there's demand for the services of real estate agents, which in turn means people out there see, hey, you know what? I've been a banker, or I've been an engineer, or I've been a taxi driver, or whatever for X amount of years. This real estate stuff's really heating up. I should get in on that. And then they get their license, and they pay for the classes, and they pay for licensing, and they pay for membership in the National Association of Realtors, and the local association. So you got to pay national, you got to pay local. So that's where their bread is buttered, right? However, in stuff like this, where we're talking about different places that you potentially might want to go that are likely to be big markets in the coming year, typically that's some pretty good data. Now, and they've got a website. The Realtor.com is really the top website in terms of listing information. It's tied directly to the MLSs across the country, and believe it or not, all the other portals that give you information are actually a separate choice on whether or not they get included in being aggregated. So you can frequently find stuff in the MLS that isn't in Zillow, because the realtor who did that listing specifically kept it off of Zillow. And it happens far more frequently than you might think. But what's interesting about this list? Actually, what's interesting is one that's missing from that list. Notice there's not a single California city on that list. Notice there's not a single New York city on that list. Notice that in general, none of these are, some of, there's definitely coastal stuff. I mean, Georgia's coastal, right? But some of these are super interesting areas. Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Alpharetta, Boise, Idaho, absolutely on the radar of people that I'm helping. Charleston, North Charleston, South Carolina. Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas. Interesting that it's the only Texas city on this list. Notice that Austin is not on that list. A few years back, on my list of suggested investment places was Round Rock, Texas, which is just north of Austin, and that's not on this list. And when you see a list like this, your very next question should be, what is this based on? Is this based on expected appreciation? These housing markets will likely carry momentum from 2020 to 2021 and beyond because of strong in-migration of new residents, faster local job market recoveries, and environments conducive to work-from-home arrangements and other factors. And this is from Lawrence Yun, the chief economist. For those of you who have been listeners to my podcast for years, not a huge fan of Lawrence Yun. Some of the things he has put out, I've done direct rebuttals to in the podcast, going all the way back to the downturn. So Lawrence Yun's been in this job forever. And I'm sure he's a great guy. I'm sure invite him over to your house for a barbecue, and I'm sure he's super fun to hang out with. But I do definitely have disagreements with him from time to time. And if memory serves, I feel like I've tended to be right more frequently than he has, but I'm not going to toot my own horn there. I'll just let the data speak for itself. I think it's interesting to note the trend here. Now we've got a little Spokane, Washington thing, which kind of surprises me. I've been up that way before. A little too rainy, a little too cold for me, but absolutely see people here. You know, Orem, Provo, Orem, Utah has absolutely not been on my radar. I have not had anybody tell me they're going to Utah, but I have had people tell me they're going to Phoenix. I have had people tell me they're going to Texas. I think one was specifically mentioning that area. I haven't had anybody tell me they're going to any of these places. I've been to Madison, Wisconsin a couple of times. Again, a place I probably wouldn't go. But again, if you're an investor, that's not what you're looking at, right? You're not looking for a place for you to live. You're looking for a place that you can invest in to give you a return. And these are places that you might want to start doing your own independent review of. Should I consider investing here? What's the barrier to entry? What's the average price? And you know what I might do is take this list and do a podcast on what would it take to get into these markets as an investor, whether you want to buy a single family residential home, a multifamily setup, or you know, or something maybe completely different. And you know, things that are completely different that are really getting a lot of success. And this is going to sound nuts, but I've interviewed a couple of people for the podcast. This was probably a year or two ago, but I went back and revisited. And you know, mobile home parks are totally a amazing opportunity for investment. You're not responsible for what goes on inside the coach. If there's a plumbing problem, not your problem, unless you're straight up just renting it, right? You can, because obviously you rent the space. So normally the person buys the coach and then you just provide power, water, sewer, and that's it. Once that pipe leaves that coach, it's not your problem. So you're not going to get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning that the toilet doesn't work, because that's not your problem. They own the coach. The coach is personal property. And in terms of just casual conversations I've had with people who have bought mobile home parks, they from an investment standpoint, they love the things. And the return on investment is even on ones where they had to go in and do a lot of work to bring them up to speed. And what's really interesting is we're seeing the aging of mobile home parks. There have been, and I'm not sure how true this is in California. I did a really quick search for mobile home parks for sale in California, and didn't find anything that really looked super awesome to me. But this is one of those things where if you're interested in finding creative ways to make things happen in the world of real estate, why not buy some acreage and make it a mobile home park? That's going to be an interesting one. I mean, I would imagine there's a lot of permit issues relating to that. You'd have to go further away from solid single family residential areas, I think, to make it happen. You just get too much pushback from local residents. But if in an area like, let's talk for a second about my local area. If you were here in Silicon Valley and you're looking for opportunities, I'd say you could go as far south as Salinas and buy yourself a piece of land somewhere along that 101 artery and get yourself a mobile home park set up that may not even be anywhere near current residential properties, and get yourself, you'd have to be zoned correctly, right? And then get yourself set up with something and offer the services, and you're done. It could, and the returns again are insane. Most of the people I've talked to who are doing it, they are doing it in this area in the east side. So they're doing it around Atlanta, they're doing it around Charleston. There's an awful lot of it happening there. One of the key points I think to take away from the way the market is right now is you need to broaden what you consider to be a good investment. Their storage facilities. The storage facilities are doing amazing business. I had found a website not long ago that almost kind of focuses on selling storage facilities. And the other option is, again, to make one, to build one as an option for you to start your investments. Now, those are obviously going to be more of an investment in terms of money and time at the front end. But once it gets going, those things just continue to make money. And by and large, you have nothing to worry about in terms of infrastructure. You've got lighting and you've got fire suppression, right? And that's a lot of it is it. If you do have stuff that is climate controlled, those things rent for a huge pile of money, but there is definitely the costs of offering that service. Okay, we're only about 5 minutes away, and I want to get the rest of these. So those are some areas, and for you who even someone who's just aspiring, there's no rule that says you have to buy something you find in these cities. But I would suggest grab onto one of these cities that sounds good to you. If I was a brand new person, I would grab onto Phoenix, and I would grab onto Boise because they're nearer to me. I'd go up on Zillow. I'd go up on Realtor.com. I'd use Realtor.com right now. That's currently my favorite to do your search, because on Realtor.com you can also, at a bigger view, see a crime heat map of the areas. And I personally like to avoid that. If I have a property I want to invest in, I prefer to just stay away from crime areas, particularly when we're talking about not single-family residential homes where the parking is not in garages. If parking is in garages, that's better. But usually in those higher crime areas, it's people breaking into cars and doing things like that. And the last thing I want is people who don't want to live in my house because their car gets broken into. I've had investor friends who someone moves into the house, 2 months later the car gets broken into. Maybe the tenants are okay with that the first time. The second or third time it happens, they're like, we're out of here. So they're going to bail, and they're going to lose you're going to get higher turnover in a scenario like that. And who needs that? All right, so let's go ahead and look at what's going on in Texas. This was an interesting one. The Texas governor says companies moving headquarters to the state has turned into a tidal wave. Now, this is one I wanted to talk about a little bit. I'm not sure, we might go a little over 11. But a quote from him is, I've been on the phone on a weekly basis with CEOs across the country, and it's not just California. On Friday, Oracle became the latest company to announce it was moving its headquarters to Texas. Oracle is a California company, and it isn't anymore, or it's not going to be. Businesses are looking for a state that gives them the independence, the autonomy, and the freedom to chart their own course. And this is a huge deal. And the response I have gotten from folks, and this kind of blows me away, we may have talked about this a little bit last month. The reality is, this is a bad thing. And you'll hear proponents of California, just fans of California in general, say, well, who cares? New businesses get started every day in California. Well, yeah. I think a number I saw that was for every company that leaves, and this is older data, there were 5 companies that were going to get created in California. Well, the problem is the companies that are leaving are big companies. It's architectural firms that have hundreds of employees. It's corporations like Oracle that have thousands of employees. And they're being replaced. Those other 5 companies that are being started are one guy in his garage. And in 5 years, by the end of the 5th year, the odds are that company will be out of business. Right? So one of those businesses may get left at the end of that 5-year period of time and may have more than one employee or may not. So we are giving up the taxes paid by the corporation and the employees of that corporation, which number in the most likely billions, right? I mean, that's thousands of employees paying taxes and a corporation paying taxes in California. That is not going to be offset by the dude in his garage in his 5th year who is now paying his niece to handle accounting. Not the same thing. So we are trading millions and millions, potentially billions, for thousands of dollars in terms of tax return. So you meet this point where stuff just doesn't work. These policies get put in place based on this idea that no one's going to actually do anything other than pay the additional tax, rather than look around and realize, I'm getting screwed, I'm out, and leaving. I always wondered how long this would take. I can remember having conversations with people in the early 90s. At what point, I mean, California is an amazing state. If you want to talk natural beauty, being able to be in the beach in the morning, the desert in the afternoon, and the snow in the evening, there's just no better state. It's amazing. The natural beauty of California is stunning. And I always asked, how far do we have to get politically before the political side of the state is so bad that the natural beauty of California can't overcome all of it, right? Like my parents still live here because of the natural beauty of California. They love being close to the beach. They love that fog when it rolls in the morning. So they're not going to go anywhere. I've asked them, if I move out of the state, can I set you up? Because I could set you up in a really, really nice place in another state if you're willing to move, and they're not willing to move. They're going to stay here forever. Um, but again, they're also at a point in their life where a lot of these crazy things that go on with the state aren't going to be an issue for them. But I have a hard time finding people who want to stay here at this point. So there's that. Next, that really feeds into this. 45% of consumers say they'd move if bosses continue to allow remote work. This is huge here, and the number here in Silicon Valley, at least, is much bigger than 45%. No doubt. We've talked before about how in California, the most recent survey I saw showed that over half of people surveyed said they want out of the state. If they had an option to move out of the state, they would take it. I would be willing to bet that the number in California is not only higher than 45%, I would be willing to bet that it's probably up closer to 60%. I would bet it's at least the number that people who say they want to leave, right? It's got to be at least that 52%. So I'd be willing to bet that it's even higher, because I bet of that 52% that want to go, the flip side of the people who don't want to go were simply not wanting to go because they were afraid they couldn't keep their job. They'd have to go looking for another job. And I am seeing far more companies that if they can have their people work from home, they are. A lot of the barriers that high-tech companies had to working from home, which were really sort of opinion-based, oh, you can't really get things done, etc., are being shattered because they've been forced to try it. And so many of them have discovered, well, holy crap, even if we ship desks and computers to their house for them to use, and fancy ergonomic chairs, even if we do all of that stuff, they are still productive enough that even if they're a little less productive, what we're saving in infrastructure in terms of buildings and square footage and all these other things totally offsets it. In fact, it offsets it to the point where even if they do see a drop in productivity on an individual employee's basis, doing it that way and then just adding another person to the mix is cheaper. So where's the downside? And now that companies have sort of grabbed onto this, and of course there's going to be some organizations where it just doesn't work, depending on the type of work that's going on. But I know an awful lot of folks who work at high-tech companies like Apple and Intel and a whole host of others where they're, from what I'm hearing from several friends who work at Apple, they're totally cool with it. Apple's now like, yeah, you know what? This is going to work for us. In fact, from what I'm hearing, Apple likes the idea because they were already looking at having the donut. For those of you who don't know, Apple built a giant UFO donut in the middle of Cupertino. Is it even Cupertino? I think it's on the other side of the freeway, so I don't think that's still Cupertino. But anyway, I think it's Sunnyvale. But anyway, they were building it to have more floor space for all the employees, and they've already found now that it would be overcrowded with all their employees. So they're totally going to embrace this whole work from home forever thing. Well, once you've done that, Apple's in various states. All of Apple's technical support organization is in Austin. So why not move to Texas, anywhere you want in Texas, and have, as an employee, your income be based on that, and you'll have no taxes. Now, I don't know what they do for regional stuff. Maybe Apple employees would want to stay officially California residents because of the amount of pay they get. But I bet if they do the math, they would quickly discover that it is cheaper. They end up with more money in their pocket if they take a pay cut for the regional pay in Texas. But here's the other part. I bet that given what's happening, it wouldn't surprise me if Apple revisits that, and other tech companies revisit that policy and minimize it because of how much money they potentially save by having people not working in the office. And given this number, given the enthusiasm of people to get the hell out, states like California should be concerned. States like California that have relied on the natural beauty of their state to keep people there don't really have that anymore. And as soon as you break that mold, right, it's just like with venture capitalists, right? Venture capitalists, if you wanted to be a venture capitalist, you had to have an address in Palo Alto on Middlefield Road. And I think one other road as well. That's just not true anymore. That mold got broken, and the mystique of it completely went away, right? You could drive down Middlefield Road and you could just pass all of the venture capitalist firms. And it was great maybe because you had a central place to go. But now that we are where we are, what we're finding is now that that's been shattered, once you've shattered the mystique of having a San Francisco office or having a Silicon Valley office, if that value is not perceived as a value anymore, why do it? Why pay the extra price per square foot because you've got that address? And what's really funny is I can remember when I very first got started in real estate, I had buyers who simply would not buy unless it was in the right zip code. It could be a home that was much better, but if they weren't in Palo Alto or in a really good example is Los Altos, right? There's Los Altos and there's Los Altos Hills. And Los Altos Hills fought for its own zip code, despite the fact, given the number of homes in that area, didn't deserve its own zip code. But they wanted it. They needed it because it needed to be a differentiator because their homes were so much better. So they got it. And it was an interesting story. It was interesting to watch happen, but it was also amazingly stupid. But that is frequently what drives people. I had people who refused to buy anything that wasn't in that Palo Alto address. In fact, I had one client who I found a perfect home for them, wasn't in the right zip code, 2 blocks away, right across the line, so it was in the right zip code, a different home, way more money. It was an Eichler with a foundation moving in 6 different directions. Bought that one because it was the right address. Okay. All right, we're a little over here, but let me go on to the other two here. National Association of Home Buyers confidence decreased to 86 in December. Interesting, right? We talked about it last time about how they were setting these records, and now it's down again. Why these? And I think the only reason is lumber, right? What was it? Let's see. Of the index's 3 components, current sales conditions dropped 4%. The 4 points to 92. Sales expectations in the next 6 months fell. I do not know why that is. We are simply not seeing pre-existing homes coming on the market in any way to challenge it. The only way these overpriced brand new homes in Morgan Hill are selling is because there simply are no other homes to buy. Housing demand is strong entering 2021. However, the coming year will see housing affordability challenges as inventory remains low and construction costs are rising. And that's primarily, I think, fed at the moment by lumber costs. Lumber costs are up at the moment. So that's obviously, since homes are made of lumber, that's going to be an issue. Okay. I think we can wrap it up there. We're a little over time this month, but I think this is an interesting pivot month. And by pivot, I mean a change from what we normally see. And I think we can expect a much more robust winter than normal. While things normally calm down in the wintertime, I don't think we're going to see that. And we're seeing a drop a bit compared to previous months, but on year to year, we aren't seeing the drop in home participation in the market that we saw last year just because it was Thanksgiving month, November. December, we're going to be, I think, surprised by continuing listings that are at an elevated level. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see the quote-unquote 2021 market, which normally, if we had a market that was completely free of a lot of this weirdness, would normally not really get heated up until May. I wouldn't surprise me if we see it more in January, February, start to see things ramp up more quickly. All right. Didn't get any questions this time. I'd love for folks to jump in and offer up, I want to sell my house in this city. What is... I'd love to try to help people directly in a hands-on way, get good information. That's always the goal. The goal is to leave you with more value and information than we take up in your time. So hopefully we're achieving that. Thanks for taking a look at this, whether you were kind of just hanging out, lurking live, or you're watching this as a recording. I appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me. You can find me at www.soldbyrobert.com. You can also find my podcast there. Podcast is up. It's Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker, up on all the platforms. iTunes is probably the most popular, but you can find it there as well. Thanks again, everybody, and I look forward to talking to you next month, where we'll cover whatever the latest news and information is at that time.